Well, I'm Cleo Witt and I'm Head of Education at Holburne, and I have been here since 1989 on and off. I'm kind of like the official oldest inhabitant. So what would you like to know about the museum?
So, what's it like to work at the Holburne Museum?
It's a roller coaster. It's a real roller coaster, particularly if you're in education, because we're the people who are always kind of facing out to the public. So we're always interacting with people, and we've always got deadlines, and we're always smiling and being bright-eyed and bushy-tailed to people. So we're actually extremely busy, and everything we do really is kind of to customers.
Well, I became a friend of the museum first when I was back in Bath, I suppose, and I was married, and I've been involved for about 20 years or so. I think I was involved straight away by joining the Friends of the Holburne Museum, and then I ended up becoming chairman of the Friends for 10 years, and then going on to being chairman of the trustees after that for 3.5 years. But it's such a wonderful museum to be involved with. Not only has it got a lot of enthusiastic supporters, but it's important. The building itself, you see, dates back to 1796, and the gardens in which it is situated, Sydney Gardens, were opened in 1795. And so it's and it wasn't a museum originally, it was the Sydney Hotel. And it was Jane Austen stayed in the house just across the road here, number 4 Sydney Place, with her parents. And she used to come into the garden and take breakfast in the garden, yes. People came and had breakfast and had supper in the gardens too. There were supper boxes at the back. And I don't know whether, I think there is a little picture in here, hopefully. It says, well, I don't know whether you could blow that up. It's what it looked like in the 18th century. And the young ladies in their long white dresses that you can see in the Fashion Museum, they sort of walked into the garden and they would meet young men, and it was a social and fashionable place to come.
Can you tell us about your relation to the Jane Austen Museum?
Yes, it's not a museum. The commercial museum is in Gay Street.
Right, with the Jane Austen house.
Where Jane Austen actually lived,
Right.
was at 4 Sydney Place, which is opposite the Holburne Museum here. The Austens lived in Bath for 4 or 5 years. Nearly all of that time was at 4 Sydney Place. And they came here when the father was retired. By that time, all the boys had left home. There were the 2 parents, there were Jane and her sister Cassandra, and there were 3 servants. And they lived here 1801 to 1804, when they moved to an address in Green Park, and the dad died, the father died, and then the women went soon after that back to Hampshire, where they'd come from. But Jane Austen spent 3 years of her fairly short life here at 4 Sydney Place. And it's a well-known building in Bath, and a lot of interest in it, obviously, because there's a lot of interest in Jane Austen. She's one of the great authors who's closely associated with Bath. It was 100 years later, nearly, it became rented accommodation. It became, the owner of the building didn't live there, let it out in flats. So it's been in multiple occupation for over 100 years. My father bought it 50 years ago, and on the same basis, and my brother and I now own it, and in latter years we have had a little visitor centre in there. It's not a museum as such, but a visitor centre, and a lot of people have been by appointment for clubs and societies, specialist groups of tourists. They come to number 4, we give them a talk, and it's got a number of, it's got quite a lot. We've fitted it out with Jane Austen not artefacts, but memorabilia. And just latterly, the ground floor has become an office, and it is rented by the Holburne Museum. It suited them very well, because with the closure of the museum for its own restoration, lottery funded restoration, it's been very useful for them to have an office immediately opposite, and with the Austin associations that works very well. What happens in the future, I don't know, but at the moment we've got this close association with the Holburne Museum, which we're both pleased about, and it is a very interesting house in itself. It is the Austin artefact, really, the house itself.
So what made your dad buy it, to rent it out, or?
Oh, just a historic fluke. He had no interest in Jane Austen, particularly.
Right.
But my brother and I have had, and so since we've taken over the running of affairs, family affairs, as I say, we've gone to some trouble to make it available. A lot of interest in it.
The museum itself has changed a lot since I first came. When I first came, I had been a curator in Bristol at the Museum and Art Gallery there, and we'd always known about the Holburne, and we'd always looked at it with great envy because it was a private museum, and so it didn't have any of the aggro that you get when you're working in local government. And also it had lovely, lovely collections, and we used to go and look at the things that they had and be really, really envious because they had some just absolutely gorgeous objects. So I'd always thought, what an amazing museum, and we'd worked with the people there when I was at Bristol. And then suddenly, when I was invited to come here and work here, it was a really exciting, really nice thing, because by then I'd retired from Bristol, so I was looking around for things to do, and here was another museum to get involved with, which was lovely.
I still am quite involved in running a Saturday morning art club in this very building, the Gardeners Lodge. My wife is a freelance art teacher for me and employed by the museum, and I come along as her assistant sometimes, and we run an art club together on a Saturday morning.
Went to school in Bathwick, primary school, Bathwick infant school, then the primary school, then eventually up to what is now called Beach and Cliff. In my days it was City Bath Boys School. So I'm an Old Sulian. I remember Standard 4 at Bathwick because we were being coached for what was in those days the 11 plus, because you had to get to grammar school. So I remember Miss Falwell, the redoubtable Miss Falwell in Standard 4. Before that, Standard 3, Ken Jones, the famous Welsh rugby player, British Lions, he was our teacher. He played for Newport, would never play for Bath. Very, very discontented, that was.
I was at the infant school under a lady called Miss Simpkins, who was very kind and loving, but a firm disciplinarian. And then I went up to the big school, which is at the bottom of St John's Road, with a Mr Weeks in charge and a Miss Falwell in charge of the class, preparing people for further education, higher education, or further education. She got very good results. It was a very good school in its day, but a lot different to the school that perhaps you might know today.
I went to school at Moorlands Infant School, and I'd come from a primary school in Kent, which was very, very formal and had a very strict head teacher. In fact, we were all very, very scared of her, and when we had assembly, she often banged her fist or hand on the table, and presumably dust rose up, but I was convinced it was smoke and that she was a witch. But that's, perhaps all children think that at that age. And we moved to Bath, to Oldfield Park, and I went to Moorlands Infant School, and it was just a different world, and I couldn't really cope with it because it was all do what you like, really. There were these little bays with different things going on, like painting, and there was what we called a Wendy house in those days, and And you could do a bit of reading if you wanted to, but some painting and playing with sand and so on. But there was a big rocking horse in the corner, and I felt safest when I was on the rocking horse, just watching everybody else, because I found it very strange from my original school.
These photographs are actually school photographs of my own daughters in this would have been in the 1970s when they were both at primary school. It's my elder daughter on her own, and it's the two of them together. And I just brought them along out of interest to see what the school uniform was like at that time. And every child was expected to wear uniform in school. Maybe they still are. I think the uniform has probably changed. Boys and girls wore a tie, and you had to have your top button done up, and it was fairly formal, but not oppressively so. I think they enjoyed wearing it. They didn't mind at all.
Do you remember things like ration books, that sort of thing?
Yeah, I do.
And the evacuation.
Obviously, that would have affected my parents much more. There were clothing coupons and rations for everything, but that didn't bother me. But after the war, there were sweet rations, and this is where I thought about it more. You had just so many coupons to buy your sweets, and you had to decide what sort of sweets you wanted and how many. And of course, if you went for the more expensive ones, you got fewer. So you had to work out with these coupons how to allocate them to get the best out of sherbet, whatever they were, or gobstoppers.
It's the important things to do.
Yeah, that's right.
The canal flourished for 50 years or so, and then they invented the railways, which also came through the gardens. The gardens here, Brunel's Great Western Railway. And that really did wreck the gardens, but Brunel went to a lot of trouble to make the railway beautiful, running through Bath, and I think he succeeded. But of course what happened was that the railway wiped the canal out commercially. It was another major advance. The canal itself had been a major advance in transport, and the railway was another major advance, and the canal basically ceased to be viable, really. Everything was going by rail, and eventually the railway company bought the canal company, and the canal company headquarters had been here, just a few hundred yards away. Cleveland House, which spans the canal, it's one of the great images of the canal, that building spans the canal at the western end. And that was built for the canal company by the Pultneys, very early 19th century. But eventually, when the railways bought them, the Great Western Railway, they shunted them up to Paddington unceremoniously, and that has been used for other things since.
My involvement with the canal is very remote. I'm on the river. I've lived there at the Bath boating station and run the business all my life, and I'm a boat builder by trade. So, yes.
Can you remember the canal when it was derelict before they
Oh
developed
yes, it was very, very sad to see it. It became virtually a wildlife haven, and there were proposals to abandon it at one time. In fact, there was a draft bill in Parliament for the Kennet Nave Canal abandonment in 1955.
Yeah, it was actually the river who came through Bath. In those days, there was a weir. It was a single weir, and at the side of the weir used to be a mill, an old mill house. And I'm not sure what sort of mill it was, but the fact that that weir was there, and the fact that the river after the weir was very bendy and twisty, meant that Bath flooded fairly frequently in the lower parts, down in Westcott Street, and Henrietta Park would flood. But this particular one was unusual because it was in the summer. I believe it was July, and Terry Hardwick was saying just recently he thought it only lasted about a day and a half before the waters went down. But it was most unusual to get a flood of that height in the middle of summer. Yeah. Very unusual. People were taken by surprise. And the houses in St John's Road that had cellars, they would have all been flooded. And it was quite a dramatic event.
These are the floods of summer '68. I took these because I was used to seeing winter floods, but I had never before seen a summer flood.
Were there lots of floods in winter then?
Yeah, common.
Yeah.
Yeah, before they did the Weir project.
Yeah.
And changed the Weir round. Yeah, for that's Henrietta Park. 19 July '68. A summer evening. Never seen the like before. Henrietta Street, that same evening, flooded. Henrietta Park. Again, Henrietta Park. I think all these remaining shots are of Henrietta Park, except that one, which is Henrietta Street. Henrietta Park. And St John's Road, and people actually boating. I live in Rockcliffe Road, and although my garden goes down the river, I have never known the water reach the house. So we were, I suppose, blasé about it, but people down in town, especially in the old Whitcomb area, St John's Road for instance, those houses, the bottom of them would have been flooded, their lower floors would have been flooded, and the basements were certainly being flooded. So that's, well, if you've seen pictures on modern television of people clearing houses after floods, you know it's a nasty job.
And has it changed at all over the years? I know there's a lot of change at the moment.
Well, the main thing was it was completely, when I first knew it, it was fully enclosed with some quite impressive gates, and it was locked at night. It's now, what changed the park completely was that all the railings, which were very beautiful bits of architecture, were all taken away for the war effort. So say to build tanks and guns and things, but and it wasn't used, but it was done, all taken away, and so it became an open park. Now that changed the whole character of the place, in my view, anyway.
I can remember we did come to the Sydney Gardens, and but that was at night, and the trees seemed very, very large, because obviously I was quite small then, and it was quite scary in a way, because they seemed to loom out of the dark. And